And let's start building up a nice backboard. What we're going to do here is we're going to make a screen that sits a quote really nicely. And what we're going to be covering in this particular title is what it's like to match a scene with your title, match the background, and we're essentially going right into that question that you just got. What about lighting? What about bevels? How do I make stuff look real? And so we'll show one example of the considerations to think about to make that title look like it's in that space, and some of the tools that you have to make that happen. And we're also going to look at, in this title, the smart text fitting that I told you about earlier. And you're going to see how powerful this is. So first, let's go ahead and type out Beercraft again. And let's get our font on there. Instead, let's pick the Berlin this time. And we'll go ahead and change our leading so that's always a good tip. Keep your text according to the weight of your font. Get that leading, especially if it's a main title, in a way so it doesn't look like it's too open between lines. So the next thing we want to do is go ahead and size this guy up. In our scale, we could actually lock the scale and do something like 12. And we'll work with that later. But first, let's go and bring in a picture that we really want to match to. And this picture is going to be a background. So let's go to File, Import Image. And here's a nice wood texture that's put in the background. Now, this is the latest element I brought into my scene, so it got added at the top track. So I want to reorder my tracks so I have my text on top of that image. So this image has a nice wood grain in it. What's interesting, it's a flat image right now, or it hasn't been rotated in space, but the photography has a bit of a distance to it, an orientation. So we're going to want to match that. And let's go ahead and start matching that orientation by clicking X, Y, and Z and start rotating that. Maybe, let's see. I did experiment earlier, and I can do a 1/24/7, something like that. So we can get this maybe down here. It still doesn't look quite right. One of the great features in the Scene tab that came in Tyler Pro 3 is the ability to change your wide-angle lens. So you can actually rotate this to be, or control this to be more or less quote-unquote extreme with your lens. And so you can set this to something that really makes this fit a little bit more into the scene. And already you can see the Beercraft is going with the wood grain and really starts to look like, okay, this is in the same world as this image. So we got that going on. Let's go ahead and start extruding this piece of text. So we'll go back to the Attributes tab, and we want to go to Style, because each style layer is what owns its own extrusion. For example, we can extrude it this way. So that wouldn't make a lot of sense right here, but maybe if we had a little bit of extrusion, let's say 5, let's dial in 5 there, that's going to start getting us somewhere. So let's size this up just a little bit more. Feels like it needs to be bigger, something like that. And we want to, I mean, a great way to do this right now is to bring the same texture that you had on the background into your text. So why don't we do that? So instead of color or gradient, let's pick a texture, and let's pick that very texture that we have as our background. All right, here we go. There it is. Now you're like, shoot, it doesn't look like it's really in the scene yet. Well, we have a little bit of work to do. First thing we want to do is maybe do some beveling on it. And so we come down here in this one style layer, and we have this bevel control. Now you can right-click and get some of the presets, like a linear soft, which is the default one, or a linear, which is quite hard, or maybe a single curve. That's good for woodwork. You know, you got that sanded down edge. And I know that this is going to happen. Watch when I increase the bevel size. Oh, I get a little bit of this strange behavior out of this particular font. It's like, that's not what I want. So this is a tip for everybody. If a font isn't really behaving well with your bevel, what you can do is work with the width of that font, which is basically a bolding or a thickening or a thinning, either way, and sometimes it'll take care of the vectors that are in that font. Not all fonts are high quality drawn, and they might have some strange Bezier moments in them that make them act a little wonky. So that's a tip for, let's see, I think 11 is going to do good for us for doing that. Now you see that nice little corner there? Now one thing we want to do as well is we want on this layer to make it more or less shiny. So that's going to do something there, especially you can see right on those bevel edges we have that nice shine appearing, and that helps us a little bit more. Because notice the texture in the background, it looks like there's kind of a bright light coming from the right-hand side. It's almost like window light, you know, hitting a table of sorts. And so we want to start emulating that. And so that's where we're going towards. Now it still looks like it's floating off the table because there's no real shadow going on. One thing I do want to do, which I forgot to do, is let's stretch the image just to the whole paragraph. I'll show you what that looks like. So if we click on our texture control, you see each letter has the texture repeated over and over. If I simply click stretch to paragraph, now the texture is being used across the whole paragraph rather than being repeated. That is something that we want to do in this case. And there's this little kind of hard line on the text out of the image. Let me just size this up to get rid of that. That looks a little better. So we'll turn off our texture size handle, and we're good to go there. Now one thing that is really good for your text, especially from your face to your sides, is to create contrast. And one way we can do that is bring in an outline. So we've been working on one style layer. Let's go up into 3D and pick an outline and bring that in. So the first thing we want to do, let's say, is the layer depth. We might want to adjust that. And we want to pick a color that's going to be kind of nice. So let's just use the color picker here and pick one of the darker colors. There you go, something like that. You can muck with it a little bit, maybe darken it up even more. Yeah, something like that. So now you can already see that our text is popping because there's a contrast at that edge level. So let's go into, let's say, it's still not quite there. It's kind of dim, right? Well, here's another great tool to use to make your text match the scene. And if you go into the library, Titler Pro 4 actually comes with a number of new effects and animations that weren't previously in Titler 3 or 2. And so go into your effects, and under Essentials is something called Video Tuneup. And if you just hover over these, you can see how you could get some wild looks out of them or some subtle changes. And we can go ahead and double click to apply this video effect to our title. And already it's like, okay, we're going somewhere with this, right? Let's set up our video tune-up to knock it down a bit, maybe around the 40s. And our brightness, we might want to knock that down a little bit, maybe something like that. And so now we're starting to get kind of a contrast that makes the text pop off of our background. But we really want to marry or glue this thing to the table, and we don't have that yet. So what we can do is we can go into one of the effects that we've already used. We can go to the library, go into the elements category, and use that drop shadow that we used previously. So we can pick a preset that might help us here. There's one that we can work with. Now, obviously, consider your texture or your video behind. It's like, where's the light coming from? We already talked about it's coming from kind of a high right. But not too high. It's mostly to the right. So what we can do is we can change our angle to get that drop shadow going where we need to be. And then we can bring in some feathering or some blur. And then change the offset a little bit to however we need that to be. So let's say 11 or so. And now you can see how it's really starting to sit in this scene. Lastly, we want to do a little bit of lighting adjustment, which we talked about earlier and we got a question on. So let's go to the Scene tab, and I'm going to roll up the 3 lights, and we'll show you, if I turn these lights off, notice how light 3, that's really helping us with that bevel and those top edges. Let's turn off light 2, it's just kind of a general shine. Light 1, clearly our dominant light. So let's work with that one a little bit. So let's open up lighting 1, and notice these circles. In fact, if I click Beercraft as the object, notice the circle jumps over there. This is a really innovative way to control light. A lot of applications kind of have this God's eye view where you see the light source up in space and you have to zoom out and kind of think about your 3D space. What we do is we keep things as you're going to see them, and we give you a control to manipulate how the light is landing on your subject matter. So, for example, if I click the background, notice how the control reorients itself to the background object. If I click the Beercraft, the control reorients itself to the text object. And what I can do, just like the XYZ handle that we had before, imagine this is kind of like a bowling ball or a globe. We can roll the source of the light and where it's coming from. So we could do something like maybe this and that. My friend, I think, is looking pretty good. So it's just a simple tweak to the lighting. You also have a number of presets here that you could go through, but I'm happy. So we'll go back to the Attributes tab. And let's now, this is the whole background. We've just set up a nice style. The whole point of this one was actually to show a quote. So let's bring in a new paragraph. So we're going to add this paragraph, and I have a quote to add from a text file. Anyone can drink beer, but it takes intelligence to enjoy beer. Let's copy that and simply paste that in. And hey, look, this is our typical text mode. And what this is this lets text string out as long as you want until you hit a carriage return. Hit enter and you make different lines that way. And that's an explicit, strong way to set up your paragraphs. But sometimes you don't know. Maybe if you've set it up as a variable, which we'll get into, you don't know how long that text string is going to be. And sometimes it's kind of hard to pick the enter or the carriage return moments. So let's change our mode. In fact, first off, let's change our text so it looks a little cooler. There you go. All right, let's change our mode from the standard mode, which is fit box to text. That means the text runs and the box just says, okay, I'm being as big as you need. And we're going to change it to fit text to box. You get an orange bounding here. And watch this. I can size open the box, and I can start reducing the width of this box. And look what's happening here. The text is now conforming to my box. So let's do something. Let's use those rulers again, and let's bring in maybe a nice guideline here. Set that up. I'm going to hold Alt, which pulls one side while keeping the other side at the same position. And we could size this up a bit. There we go. That's a nice quote. We can bring it up in space. Maybe we can use our control drag again to make another version. And let's go ahead and bring the author into this thing. So that was Stephen Beaumont. Paste. There you are, Stephen. And notice, even with there's a couple things going on here. One is that it's wrapping text, and the other thing is if it doesn't quite fit, it actually knocks down the point size as well. So here we have a great way of putting two pieces of text in their position. And now let's make sure that their variables are set. So what is this? Well, variables are a way for you to create a design like this, this design here with this quote, and reuse that design with different text strings in the QuickEdit panel, which we'll get into shortly. But first off, let me just go into the Object tab. And down here, text variable, notice that's turned on. What is this? This is the quote. So let's say we want to name this label so it makes sense to us. And what's this thing down here? Well, that is the author. Text variable, author. And Beercraft, I don't want that to change. So let's say, let's turn off text variable. And so Beercraft is not going to be exposed as a text string that a user can later edit. So let's go ahead and just close this thing down. Let's get this onto our timeline. And here we go. Here it is. And the last thing we want to do is let's have a nice intro to this whole thing, a nice animation that gets us in. Let's open this up again. And we will have Stephen and this thing. Let's quickly do some things that you guys have seen. You'll see how quick it is to work in here. Let's do a fade in. So let's fade linear on this guy. Let's fade linear on this guy. They can be slower, fast fades, let's say. That works. And now what I want to do is do Control to do a multiple selection. I also want to get that background. I'm going to right click and I'm going to group. And now that I've grouped, I can do a whole keyframing on this entire group. So let's say around 1 second. Turn on keyframing. Let's put a keyframe there. Let's back up a little more, and let's say that this element goes down a bit, let's say, and tilts. Let's see what kind of tilt do we want to do. There we go. Now this background's not big enough for me. Let's open up the group. I can continue to modify the background. So if I go to rectangle and size this up a little bit more there, that's going to take care of me. So we have this turn. And so let's go to our group line where we have all these keyframes. Get to the first keyframe. Turn on smooth interpolation here. And let's rotate this thing almost like a barn door. And let's bring it up in the scene. A little bit more rotation up in the scene. Let's see what we got. There we go. Nice barn door. It's a little slow. I want to make it faster. I'm just simply going to move my keyframes. Perfect. And so now, let's say we want to use this way to get out of here as well. So let's put a keyframe back here. Just add one. Add one. Add one. And now we can do the fun thing of right-clicking and copying the properties of one keyframe. Go to the last keyframe and paste those properties. Go to the properties of the second keyframe and copy them. The fifth one, paste them. Third one, copy them. Fourth one, paste them. So let's see what we're going to do now here. Zoom. Got our text come in. And there goes the barn door. All right, so let's go ahead and close. Now I've got this great barn door happening. And what about this quote? Well, let's double click. And one thing I've done through this whole tutorial so far, this webinar, is I had gone into settings and set always open to Title Designer. That's not the default setting of Titler Pro 4. So let's go ahead and uncheck that and watch what the behavior is when we open up this title asset again. What you get is you get QuickEdit. And QuickEdit, by the way, under settings, you can jump back and forth between Title Designer and QuickEdit right here if you want as well. But what QuickEdit does is it gives you access to all the templates that ship with Titler Pro 4 that you can purchase as additional add-ons or that you make yourself and use them over and over again in your timeline. And notice, remember those variables that we were talking about? Well, here's the quote and here's the author. Now the great thing is we set up the paragraph to be fit text to box, right? So let's now go, let's say we're doing a blog and we have the quote of the day, and now I have a much longer quote. So go ahead and copy that quote, and we will paste it in, boink, and hit enter. Check that out. The quote perfectly fits into that space, and what I really love is Abraham Lincoln made this quote. Copy. Let's get Abe in there. Paste. I'm a firm believer in the people. If given truth, they can be depended on to meet any national crisis. The great point is to bring them the real facts and beer. So, good old Abe.